Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here in Finland with Frozen Trigger, taking a look at a series of historical Finnish sniper rifles. Today, we have the Civil Guard M33 sniper. This is the second variation of Civil Guard sniper rifles, and it comes about because the Civil Guards had improved their M28 rifle to become the M2830 rifle, primarily by dramatically improving the rear sight. At this point, the Civil Guard was heavily involved in competitive shooting, competitive marksmanship. They had a lot of really good shooters, and they were putting a lot of thought into the design of their rifles to get maximum accuracy out of them. The M2830 is kind of known as the best shooting of all the Finnish Mosin patterns because of all that work that the Civil Guard was putting in. So it probably shouldn't be that surprising that they also made both a pretty good and also definitely overly complicated optics-mounted sniper rifle version. So where we left off on this story with the M28 was that the Civil Guard had made 10 sort of quasi-production M28 rifles and then put them aside while they knew that they were improving the base rifle. Once that base rifle is done, they come back to this program. At this point, they have decided on the specific scope that they want to use, and that's the Zeiss Zielview 4-power, sort of typical for the time scope. Now, it's interesting, at the time they discovered that the Russian army, which is also, well, the Soviet army at the time, which is also working on developing a sniper program, has gotten a better version of scope than was otherwise commercially available from the Germans. And the Civil Guard leverages this to get the same kind of really good modern scope for themselves. I'll show you that up close in a minute. But they buy 25 of these Zeiss scopes, and in 1933, the scopes are sent to the Civil Guard workshops. I'm not sure if it was Sako, which was the primary Civil Guard workshop, or if it was perhaps one or more other smaller shops, but they're sent off to Civil Guard shops to have scope mounts and bases fitted to the guns, have the scopes installed, zeroed. 1933, these are delivered to the Civil Guard and they're sent out for testing. So let's take a closer look at what it is they were testing. So the base rifle here is just an off-the-rack M2830. Sako was making the rifles for the Civil Guard, and they just pulled a batch of 25 off the line. So there wasn't any specific accuracy testing before they turned these into scoped rifles, which is actually probably fine. For the 2830, these were all very well made, very accurate rifles. If we take a look on the other side of the barrel, there's our serial number. These went from 842 to 866, and they did actually serialize the scope mounts as well to match. So this one, the base and the rifle are off by 2 digits, but during military service, there wasn't so much effort taken to match these when they had to repair or restore rifles. Also, worth pointing out here, we have that little SA stamp. That indicates Army possession, so we'll talk about this in a minute, but these rifles all went into Army possession when the Winter War began. While the guns themselves weren't like specifically picked for accuracy, they were finished a little bit differently than standard 2830s. The stocks were all made of walnut instead of the usual birch, and the actual fit and finish given to the guns was higher quality than what was done for a standard 2830. This one, of course, has seen many years of wartime service, and so that high quality finish isn't really visible anymore, but it was there when the gun was first made. Now, obviously, the most unique element of this is this scope mounting system, which is really kind of ridiculously complicated. In order to take it off, we actually only need to remove this bolt. We do have, I think, the only surviving known tool for doing this. This is a hex wrench that will fit both of these two, and it also fits this guy. So we go in there. I'm just going to loosen that up and then unscrew it till it stops. Then I can slide the scope backwards. We have a female dovetail here added to the side of the rifle. This inner part is actually a separate component from the outer part here, and that is used to give elevation adjustment on the base. So I've got these two square screws that I use to set base elevation by tightening one and loosening the other. So you can see how that pivots there. We take these entirely off. Each one of them has a little washer on it as well. Line that up. There we go, and we can remove this inner piece as well. So these holes are oval to allow this to pivot to set 0. This center pin locks in there. Like, this thing's really complicated. This T-shaped screw fits in here, and then it also goes all the way through and extends into the dovetail here to ensure that the scope doesn't actually come off once it's tightened into place. The scope is a Carl Zeiss made in Jena, and it's specifically the GZ4X. I should say the serial numbers are a single run for the fins, starting at 47,000 and running up to 47,024. Not clear exactly why that serial number range, but those numbers are not intended to match the serial numbers on the rifles that these scopes went on to. And what's cool about these scopes is, instead of what was at the time still pretty common of just having an elevation adjustment with a locking knob here, so you loosen that and then you can adjust your elevation. This is a BDC cam right there out to, I believe, 1,200 meters. And you'd set it to where you want and then tighten that down. Well, the Finns discovered that the Russians had managed to get a version of the scope that had also windage adjustment the same way. At this period, windage adjustment is normally done in the base of the scope itself. So this is actually one of the period Russian military scopes. You can see its design is slightly different. We've got, I believe, mills here for elevation adjustment, as well as, or for windage adjustment as well as elevation. When the Finns bought these from Zeiss, they were able to negotiate the inclusion of Finnish abbreviations here. This is left and that's right for windage adjustment, and a BDC cam. So it's the same pattern of scope, but a slight variation for Finnish use. In order to fit the scopes into these mounts, well, first off, we have pivot pins up here. So the mounting rings are pinned here, so they open up. You open these two screws, set the scope in. They then actually drilled a hole into the body of the scope and set a pin in the front ring that locks the scope in position here so that it can't slide. One presumes this would have a negative impact on the sealing and potential fogging of the scope, but you know, it's a test batch and that's how they did it. There's only one pin. They've got one at the front, but they don't have one at the rear. I don't have any detailed reports on the results of testing of these rifles in the field, but it appears that they were fine. There may have been some small tweaks that ought to be made, but there were no major problems. However, it didn't really make sense by the time trials were done to continue developing the rifle quite yet, because the Civil Guard learned that the Finnish Army was working on its own sniper rifle program, and the Guard decided to basically just sit tight, let's see what the Army does, and maybe we should, you know, take some inspiration from what they do, or maybe they're going to come up with something that we want to make sure we replicate or have compatibility with. Well, the Finnish Army took its sweet time actually developing a new sniper rifle on the rehabilitated M27 platform. It wouldn't be until 1937 that the Army introduces its own sniper rifle. That's the M27PH with this really blocky square Fisica scope. I do have a video on that. I'll link to it in the description text below if you want to check it out. But by that point, it's now 1937, and instead of being able to go back and keep working on this rifle, well, by this time there's yet another new base rifle platform in the works, and that'll be the M39, developed collaboratively between the Civil Guard and the Finnish Army. So once again, like, oh, we'll put this on hold and wait until there's an M39 rifle, and we'll take all of our good optics mounting ideas and put them into an M39 sniper. Well, spoiler, I suppose, that didn't happen either, because before the M39 could even get into production, the Russians invaded and the Winter War happened. So all 25 of these Civil Guard M33 snipers are seconded to the Army during the Winter War. They all see combat service. The ones that remain in Army possession at the end of the Winter War see, again, use in the Continuation War. Ultimately, today, there are only 3 known surviving examples because, well, there was a pretty high loss rate during 4 years of military operations, and then the Finnish Army, well, they kept them in service for a little while after World War II ended. Ultimately, these were some of the first of the sniper rifles that were scrapped, demilled, sold, in lieu of keeping more standardized patterns instead of small batch things like this. So very cool to get a chance to take a look at one of only 3 surviving examples. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.